All right, that's my cue. Well, welcome everybody. Thanks for joining us for the lunch hour today. My name is Megan Teresi, and I'm the director of the Professional Development Center here at St. Ambrose University. We're super excited to have you here today for our Business Essentials Lunch and Learn series. This has been going on for about 2 years, a little over 2 years now. And it's just a great way that we can bring some of the wonderful Ambrose education to our community in these short sessions. So with that, I am going to hand it over to my colleague, Dr. Arun Palutla, to tell you just a little bit about our sponsor for this year's series, which is the H.L. McLaughlin Masters of Business Administration at St. Ambrose University. Arun?
Yes, Megan, thank you. And to all of you, welcome. My name is Arun Pilutla, and I'm the Associate Dean of the College of Business and the Director of both the H.L. McLaughlin MBA program and the Master of Organizational Leadership program. As the Director of the H.L. McLaughlin MBA program, I welcome you to today's Lunch and Learn, which is sponsored by the H.L. McLaughlin MBA program. As the Associate Dean of the College of Business, I want to note that in addition to the H.L. McLaughlin MBA program, I know, we got to say that, the College of Business offers 3 other graduate degrees: the Master of Accounting, the Master of Organizational Leadership, and the highly ranked Doctor of Business Administration program. These programs are offered in a combination of in-person and online formats. The Doctor of Business Administration program is offered in weekly synchronous Zoom class format. If you want to learn more about any of the College of Business programs, then please follow the link on the slide. Now, as a longtime colleague and admirer of Dr. David O'Connell, it is my distinct pleasure to invite him to make today's presentation. Before he steps in, however, I want to note that he personifies the best of what a scholar is. He has a DBA in management from Boston University, published several original theoretical and empirical articles, written case studies, taught undergraduates, masters, and doctoral students, guided doctoral research, and previously served as the Dean of the College of Business here at St. Ambrose University. There is no one better than Dr. David O'Connell to represent the best of the H.L. McLaughlin MBA program and the College of Business here at St. Ambrose. With that, I invite Dr. David O'Connell. David?
Thank you, Arun. Thank you very much. Megan, were you going to do some get acquainted things here to start off? I was just checking to see if that was part of what you wanted to do at this point.
Yes, thank you so much. Before we get into today's topic, for those of you who've joined us in the past, we usually spend just about 2 minutes at the top of the hour in breakout rooms, getting to know each other a little bit and doing a little bit of networking. So, you know, along your business journey, your career journey, it's so important to see and hear from others who are in similar positions as you in our community. So what I'm going to do is actually just invite you in the chat to tell us a little bit about yourself and really, you know, where you're coming from and a little bit about what you hope to learn today. So if you want to add that to the chat, name, organization that you're from, and maybe just a quick couple of words about what you're hoping to learn today, we would love that. And otherwise, I will go ahead and let you get us started here, Dave.
Okay. Let's see if I'm going to be good at getting our screens, my screen shared again, like we had just recently. All right. Well, everyone, how will I find my screen here? It's my pleasure to work with you briefly here this noon hour today. It's a topic that I think impacts all of our lives, and it's not one that I would claim to be an expert in terms of always managing conflict in my own life perfectly by any means, but together I think we'd be able to explore some principles and some tips and give you a bit of time to process a real conflict in your own life as part of this seminar. So I think this brief seminar will mean more to you if you just think briefly of a conflict that you had in the past, preferably a workplace conflict, or maybe one that you're facing right now. And as we go through this, we're going to give you an opportunity to think about that conflict, analyze it, and as our time goes, we may be able to get into breakout rooms to just share a little bit of insight about one another's conflict situations, so we can learn from one another about what you've taken from this, but probably even more important, how you've learned to manage conflict in your own life. All right. So this word is really big, really big in terms of the print on the screen. And I'm asking you to think, what's your gut reaction to the word, right? If I say conflict, what comes to mind for you? You don't have to write that down right yet, but what kind of sentiments come to mind for you? Now, there's probably a lot of thoughts, a lot of feelings about it. This graphic just says, often there's some tension in the workplace, right? My way, your way, how do we create our way, which is often what we're after at work and in our personal lives as well. And I'm gonna see if we can run this first poll that will kind of tie into the topic, the title of our session today. And Megan, is it possible to run this poll? This poll will, I'm asking you to pick one of these. Which do you pick to describe your reaction to the word conflict? Is it something bad, ugly, good, none of the above? Is that poll running now, Megan?
It doesn't seem to be like letting Megan do it. So if
It
you just want to
should
put
be
it in
open
the
now.
poll.
Yep, sorry.
I see it now. Okay.
Yep.
Yeah, I see a lot of answers coming in. The bads are in the lead so far. Shifting around a little bit there. Everybody answered. Okay, I guess we have another version of it there. So the results of our poll was 38% said it's something bad, 20% said ugly, only 12% said good, and about a third said that really it's none of those things that come to mind when you hear the word conflict. Wonder if anybody would be bold enough to just share just a bit about how your word, the thing that comes to mind for you, is not bad, good, or ugly, and it's something else. Who would share that? You just open your mic and just say a couple words about that.
This is Brian Kennedy. I said it's good because nothing happens until there's a change, and sometimes we don't know that there's a change needed until there's friction. What's bad about conflict is when it's left unresolved. Thanks for letting me share.
Yeah, great. Yeah. Good and bad. I think that's a great perspective, Brian. Thank you for sharing that. Conflict can bring about a lot of good things, and it's actually essential when it comes to certain kinds of outcomes that we're looking for in our own lives personally and in our organization lives. And unresolved, hidden conflict, unencountered conflict can cause all kinds of problems, which is probably where some of the sentiments come out. We see bad or ugly because it causes a lot of stress and tension as we work to deal with it, and as we, especially if we don't deal with it all that effectively. So when we think about conflict, I'm going to ask you to just maybe think about that conflict story you might have in mind. That conflicts have a structure. Okay, that's that first image on the screen. Is just the idea that there's parties involved and a context in which it happens around, say, one or more issues. right? So there's a structure, there's parties, there's context, there's issues. There's a process. So conflict we can experience as a sentiment, and we're all familiar with that. But I'm going to ask us to consider seeing conflict as a process. That there's behaviors and experiences that we can walk through more or less effectively, rather than just a point in time being conflict. And there's different kinds of outcomes of conflict. We, in a really simple way, we can say there's conflict outcomes around the task, right? Around the things, the issues we're trying to resolve, and the things we want to move forward on. And then there's social outcomes, right? There's a relational piece as well as the task-oriented piece. And ideally, we're looking to resolve and deal with conflicts in a way that gives credence to both getting the job done and building relationship. I was going to say just preserve relationship, but I think if conflict is done well, it can be more than just preserving. It can be a way to actually improve a relationship. Now, here's some possible positive effects of conflict. I'm going to be really upfront. I'm selling the positive view. Even though we might not all feel that way, I get it. I get a little bit of that, retreat in my gut when I think about conflicts. But some of the real upside is improved relationships. Have you ever had that experience where there is something that's maybe not worked out? It's not clarified. There's something between two or more parties. And if you actually step in, listen with some open-mindedness and work towards a resolution, relationships are much better. A lot of people find this in actually personal relationships. If you have unspoken things or unaddressed issues, you're letting the sun go down on your anger, so to speak. That is much less effective than learning how to engage in it. The conflict is part of problem solving, right? We had a seminar that we taught at the Arsenal several years ago, and it was about a particular way that the two-star general wanted issues to come to his office, right? So they had a particular name for it in the military for case study analysis, and it was really a rational problem-solving template. And working through a problem, even using that 10-step process, required that more than one viewpoint had to be engaged, more than one possible way of going forward had to be considered. And without some conflict and dialogue, and as well as analysis, solutions would be much thinner. It's a key to creativity, innovation, and your own personal growth as you build skills. As I said, there's a process view. You might have a temperament that leans you more towards or away from conflict, but this is a skill-based situation. That's why it's worth spending a little time on it today. So, do I have another poll here for this, Megan? Okay, this is a little different from the prior question. There, if you had to just pick one, what's your predisposition or your current practice? Do you tend to lean into conflict and say, okay, let's dig into it, or do you tend to lean away from it? So, are you leaning in or leaning away? There's no judgment on here. I don't see who's answering what question on that. But frankly, which way do you tend to go? Are people able to fill that one in now? Yep. Okay. I'm just not seeing the responses here yet, so that's okay. Wow, that's amazing. Almost exactly 50-50. 50-50. Would someone who picked lean into conflict just share what that's like for you? Why you're at the place where leaning in is something that you generally tend to do? I know a number of people picked that, right? I don't know who said what, but who would be brave enough to open your mic and just share a little bit about why you lean into conflict?
This is Kristen Egger. I didn't get to vote, but I will share because I think it's important. So in a sales role that I do with Marco Technologies, I tend to lean into conflict because I'm usually trying to solve whatever my customer's problem is. But on the other hand, when it's an uncomfortable problem and this is where my downfall is and I don't want to deal with it, I tend to lean out.
Wow, I really appreciate the honest report. So you've seen it bear real good fruit in a sales context, it sounds like. So it makes sense. Sure. And some of the best sales approaches have to do with helping customers solve problems, right? And if there's have the word problem in there can be conflict. So I appreciate the frank answer. And to see it just about 50-50, I'm not surprised. Now, this is a statement by Pat Lencioni from the Table Group, and this is from his Table Talk podcast. He's the guy who wrote The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, The 3 Signs of a Miserable Job, and a number of other books. And I just think he's got a real insight in this short statement, right? Lack of conflict around ideas ferments into conflict around people, right? So it becomes less of a task if you aren't going at the ideas and working through the hard differences in viewpoint around ideas, it's likely to build up some of those, she's always like that. Why is she like that? She's a blank, 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 fill it in, whatever you want to do. So if you let the conflict become the other person being the problem, the embodiment of the problem, it's not going to be as productive as seeing if we can look at the task together, right? Looking at the task together rather than you are the problem and I'm looking for a solution to you. Can we change our postures so that we can put the problem between us or among us, like on the table, and look at the problem together? That's going to be incredibly powerful. Now, a key tip, I have a number of these key tips in here, is you do have choices, right? Half of you tend to lean into conflict. I heard a nice description of leaning in and being honest to say sometimes not so much, or lean away, but you do have choices. And learning to deal with conflict in more productive ways actually is an extremely valuable skill set. And I think it leads to more effectiveness and just a little more peaceful space in your own life when you kind of step over the hurdle into doing conflict well. This is what do you think's going on in this slide? You don't have to say it out loud, but what do you imagine is happening in this conversation? I would think that maybe the way you fill that in might be tied to your own predisposition about conflict. They don't look completely happy. The woman looks maybe frustrated, annoyed. Just look at the eyes. But that doesn't mean that they're in a bad situation if they're really going to work through the problems. I'm going to pull one definition. We could probably find 1,000 definitions on the web. One definition of conflict I found quite useful, and because I'm drawn to it because it's from one of the people who did a lot of the work around conflict in the workplace, Ken Thomas. And I'm going to walk through this piece by piece because each piece gives us a certain insight into conflict. So Thomas says conflict is the process that begins when one party perceives that the other has negatively affected or is about to negatively affect something that he or she cares about. process. Not just a sentiment, the process. So the process means there is a set of behaviors, there's a set of words, there's things that happen, and that is the living out of conflict. That is the living out of conflict. And the process, again, is kind of traveling along a road. Right? Sometimes a conflict, you might see it like this, but more likely you see it like this, right? At the exact directions, there's a lot of doubling back or trying to recast what was said before and so forth, but it is a process. Now, we also said in the structure of conflict, there are parties, right? Those are the two or more individuals who are involved in the conflict. And it might not always look like this party. I don't know, maybe. Megan, you have those pants, don't you? Yeah, okay. I thought I saw you wearing those at work the other day. So another part of that definition is perceives. I perceive that you've stepped into my interests, or I get a feeling you're about to do it, right? You're about to do it. And have you ever had that experience where you get a little bit of a cue from somebody, and then you fill in this whole story about what they're really thinking, right? What's really going on in their lives, and all the attributions behind what you've just made up. Am I just the only weird one here, or is that really what a lot of us do, right? Oh yeah, I got a whole story about what Arun really meant when he said, whatever, what Megan really said, what Brian really meant. And you're all probably quite familiar with this famous diagram, right? If you look at this, just kind of focus your eyes a little bit differently, back and forth, and you'll probably see two very different sets of images, right? Now, how many of you see a vase? You can just raise your hand if you want to, or some of you might see a vase in the middle, right? How many of you see two faces looking at each other across this white space? It's the same drawing, it's the same, white and black imagery, yet we can see it quite differently. And people who study perception say that's the difference between the figure, the thing that steps out from a situation that we can see and our attention is drawn to, and the ground, which is the background. It's like if you've had a child maybe step away from you in a shopping mall, heaven forbid, and you're looking, and somehow your eyesight is sharpened so you can see that little boy in the blue jacket who just scooted out from behind the carriage, right? That little boy can stand out from the whole crowd because you're looking for that item, right? That person, that image stands out from the background. Where if you're just scanning people walking around in the aisles of the store, probably it's not going to stand out the same way. Now, this is just a quick discussion, just a very quick illustration from my own life that had a lot of emotion, a lot of energy, and I didn't realize it, but a lot of danger in it at the time. For many years, my wife and I lived in Albuquerque, and we got a small dog, a little lab, right, a little puppy just starting to bounce around the yard and so forth. And we'd come home from a walk, had the puppy in the front yard and played with the dog, and then opened the garage door and went in, right? And then I think we closed the garage door, and then we were in the house, and I heard something on the roof of the house. Now, there's some like pounding or stepping or something on the roof of the house, and so what's going on? What's going on? And so I open the back door into the backyard, and I step out, and there's a police officer with a gun, aiming right down where I was standing, right there, as I stepped out. And then they confronted me, says, you live here and so forth. I said, well, yeah. I don't think I said too much to him, but I'm thinking, and what are you doing on my roof, mister? And turned out that the neighbors had called, thinking they saw our house getting broken into, and the police came, and at least one officer was on the roof, and might have been another one or two in the yard because they wanted to catch who had broken into our house. So it was extremely responsive, positive, but I shared this story. It was in an MBA program at the time. I used to work in a utility company in Albuquerque, and I was sharing it with some MBA comrades in a class. I said, yes, this thing happened last night or on Friday night or whatever. And I stepped out and I said, I don't have a gun in the house. And but the one guy says, oh yeah. Well, what I would do is I would hear that sound and I would start shooting through the roof from the living room. No understanding, no context. I would understand the emotion, understand the, I guess, hair trigger reaction in a literal sense, but it would have been so tragic without seeing the situation a little more clearly. So I thank God that I just stepped out and it didn't go badly in that way, right? And so we say that I have a feeling that you're impacting my interests negatively or about to impact them negatively, positive or negative, and that it's something that I care about. That's my interest. When Thomas uses the term interest, something that you care about. So, and that could be a wide set of things. It could be your interest in a conflict. And an important point here is that my interests in a conflict are not really the same thing necessarily as the position I take, right? Say, think of it as a bargaining situation. Is my interests, might be I want to gain more territory in terms of the sales allocation, but my bargaining position might be I need, this many square blocks assigned to me. So if I just narrow it down to a position, my interest might be just slightly hidden. So I'm going to again ask you to think about this conflict and who is involved. It's in your own life. What's it about? What are your thoughts and emotions and what happened? So we're going to have time to discuss these in breakout rooms in a little while. I'm just kind of doing a little more seed sowing. So I want you to take it apart. What created it? How did it proceed? And it's going to involve a very important skill, as you do this kind of thing, who, what, thoughts, process, results, to back up to do what people talk about developing a neutral statement of the conflict. Now, if you're ticked off or you're jubilant or whatever, it might be unnatural for you to say, okay, let me say, I am really so mad about this, but what is actually happening? Can I describe it? Try to step back enough to describe the conflict. But then you have more power over it than it having power over you. Then think about what kind of conflict is it? We say our interests are challenged, but is it about differing information, right? Different sources of information. Is that behind the conflict? Do we actually have values, personal values that are in conflict? Is it just the interest, say in a business deal? Or are there structural conflicts? There's something about the organizational structure and the nature of our roles that actually define and feed the conflict. So conflict, if we think of it as a process, right? We have awareness of it. Emotions and thoughts often occur very, very quickly, almost instantaneously. Then we have intentions, the behavior, which could be words or actions. And then there's an exchange, and there's some outcomes. And this obviously isn't always linear, but just to think, Oh, there is some identifiable parts of a conflict episode. People study conflict in depth. They start talking about conflict episodes and how one episode, especially if it's not resolved well, can trigger another conflict episode. And part of the reason for that, working that way, this quick reaction, people who've read some of the work by Daniel Goleman around emotional intelligence, know he makes a big deal about the amygdala in the brain, where that's kind of the fight or flight center, and that when we get agitated and that amygdala starts sending out hormones, I think dopamine, and it's going to norepinephrine, it's going to send out physically things happen in our bodies, right? As heightened awareness, maybe muscle tightness, and it doesn't have to become extended or dramatic, but it's going to happen if you feel jolted by a conflict. And so managing those initial emotions is part of what makes for avoiding this idea of Goleman calls it an amygdala hijack, where just like, oh man, if you ever had a situation where you kind of lost it, right? And you said, man, you can look back at it and say, that just took me over. I didn't react, I didn't manage, I didn't take steps, right? So we think about intentions, behavior, interactions. That's a very simple summary of what we had before. I'm going to share another key tip. We see this button on a computer or a phone or whatever. What does it normally mean? We see that button. Pause. It's the pause button. Man, that is a huge skill in communication and actually listening, and sometimes in just getting our breath, right? Pause. And probably most of you find that pause, if you initiate it, so to speak, or you just don't respond and there's a blank spot in the action, it might seem like quite a long time to you, when to the other party it's not that long. But it was Viktor Frankl who's credited with this statement. He said, between a stimulus and a response, there is a space. In that space is our power to choose our response. And in our response lies our growth and our freedom. You know, he wrote about some very profound human principles that he learned as a trained psychologist when it became known as logotherapy, but also being a survivor of multiple concentration camps and seeing that people who saw purpose and made choices in the midst of horrible situations came out very differently from those who let it overwhelm them. So I talked to my friend Dan Ebner here. We were talking one day about grace, which is one of my favorite topics personally, and also I think in the workplace. Grace walked out in tandem with accountability can create incredible positive energy. And he said, you know, when Frankl talked about that space, our power to choose, he said, I think that's where grace is. I think that's where you have that moment to make a choice and frame your response and then react. Now, it's easy to describe, right? But this is an illustration that a colleague, he's retired now from Ambrose, but still very active, Randy Richards, Dr. Richards, was teaching a seminar around effective leadership communication. And I was taking it as a student, so I could prepare to teach it myself. He said, you know, there's this predictable emotional ride that we tend to go on when something really gets our juice going, right? And but it's somewhat predictable. So he's talking about the other person going on the ride, you know, where there's something that spurs the reaction, and then there's a fairly rapid climb up, and then often eventually, when it starts to come down, then you could probably speak rationally to the other party. And there might be another up, but using this image is quite powerful, because I like to think about it as, can I step back emotionally, not giving up on the conflict, but just get enough space for myself that I can see the other person go on that ride without getting in the car with it or with him, right? That's part of the trick. So that's part of avoiding getting into the conflict spiral. If I can let the other person take the ride and look for the spot to come in and talk more effectively. Some describe this as using the balcony. Heifetz and others have written about adaptive leadership, and this is one of the concepts that they use for helping engage large groups of people in really complex situations. That if you can be in the midst of a complex situation and then take yourself to the balcony, right, in your mind. So you're looking down at the conversation that you're in and being a bit analytical about it, right? And when we say use the balcony, I'm absolutely not saying avoid conflict. I'm saying do some perspective getting on the conflict, then you can interact more effectively. Now, there's conflict styles, and I was going to use an instrument. There's many instruments you can find on the web to assess your style. I'm going to just give you a map of, this is a very commonly used model of conflict. I'm just going to ask you to consider, as I describe each of these, is there one style that or at least a strong tendency that you have in the workplace? And none of us have, I would say it'd be very rare to be all in one of those rectangles, but you might have one or two where you tend to want to go, or you might tend to go. So this is a model that shows the behaviors in conflict are measured on two axes, right? How cooperative you tend to be in the situation, and how competitive you tend to be, okay? And those two axes help us see different styles of conflict, right? So avoiding is over in the lower left-hand corner here, and that's when you're just not in the game, right? That's when you're low on cooperation and low on competition. I just don't want to get in. I want to avoid it. I just want to step away, right? So that's avoiding. And if you, and all of us might have a little bit of avoiding, and some have a lot more. And that's something to really try to work on, I would say. Accommodate, right? This is really cooperative, but you're not actually advocating for your own interests. So it's kind of like, whatever you think, I'm going with it. Might seem friendly, and there could be times when situation is very low stakes for you. You could just say, okay, whatever you want. Other times that can be the beginning to conflict going awry, right? If there's something you really need to address. Competing, this is when you're low on cooperativeness, but very high on assertiveness or competitiveness, right? And competition is not a bad thing in my mind, just as a general principle. But if that's your conflict style, that you have to win rather than come to a shared resolution, you're going to miss out on a lot of opportunities. I like the saying is that you can win a battle, you can even win a debate that's scored, but you can't win a conversation. Right? You don't win a conversation. You're more or less skilled as someone dealing in the conversation. Okay, compromise. That's in the middle, you see, of this diagram, the way that it's set up. And that's where they're somewhat competitive and somewhat cooperative. And a lot of conflict is dealt with in compromise, which is better than leaving it unresolved, absolutely. Some say if you can go towards collaboration or an integrative way of coming to a solution, it's even better than compromise, because you might say in this situation, people each gets some of what they want, but neither gets their interests really fully met. So if we think about options kind of outside the box, sometimes we can even do better than compromise, right? That's the idea of collaborating and, asking yourself questions like, am I listening as much as I'm talking? Am I interested in helping the other person get what she needs? Am I clearly expressing my own interests? Do they know what I really need? Can I summarize what they said? Sometimes it's actually a good conflict communication style to say, let me see if I hear you, and just do a bit of a reframing, restating of it, and ask yourself, do I understand their interests? So really, a huge key to conflict is listening hard. Now, undergrad students, sometimes I think, well, listening, I took one earbud out. And that's pretty big, and hearing, having your eardrum vibrated is one thing, but listening is an active, effortful behavior. So we want to be hard on the problem and have respect for the people. Now, there's a famous story I'm not going to really develop here called The Ugly Orange that Fisher and Urey elaborated on in the book called Getting to Yes. If you haven't read that book, it's been around for a long time. Small paperback, but incredible, sensible guide for what they call principled negotiation. And they tell a story of a conflict where there was arguing over a load of oranges and just back and forth and getting very, very heated, very heated. And finally, one person revealed that she wanted the oranges for the peels, and the other party that he wanted the oranges for the pulp and the juice. And suddenly, the resource that was being contested doubled because they understood the interests. So I'm going to ask you to return again to a conflict situation that you want to think through, make a couple of notes, your story. We're going to encourage you to put the problem on the table, or at least imagine yourself doing that in this conflict with another party. Could be something you're facing now or something you faced in the past. And you say, I'm going to kind of have a mental redo on that, And who was in it? Process, thoughts, emotions. What were the results you hoped for? What were the real results, if it's already happened? Kind of conflict. How might you improve it, right? Might you go forward? Now I'm going to see if we can call Megan in. Maybe just put us in several breakout rooms for just about 7 or 8 minutes, so that you would have an opportunity for anyone who cared to just share a conflict, how they understand it, and have worked it, or are trying to work it, and invite other people's comments on it as you feel comfortable. So, Megan, is that something you can make happen for us?
Absolutely. So if you've never done Zoom breakout rooms before, I'm going to go ahead and create and open those rooms. Go ahead and jump in. If you are in a situation, I know we've got a couple of people who have multiple people in the room. Don't feel like you have to go in that breakout room. Just mute yourself and chat with the folks in your room with you. So again, if you are wanting to go in the breakout rooms, I'm going to go ahead and open those right now. You can click join to join those. If you are in a situation where you're unable to join, you can just hang out here with us until we come back together.
Thank you, Megan.
All right, Dave, folks should be trickling in here. We're probably still waiting on just a couple of more people to trickle back into the main session.
Okay, good.
Looks like we are all set.
Okay. Is my camera off now or on?
We do not see you.
Maybe everyone's happy about that. I don't know. The, now that seemed to have dropped off. All right, just a quick summary. I hope that your experience, just that you come away from this session with just maybe one or two nuggets. Right? I think that's a win when you attend a brief seminar like this. It's just one or two nuggets that will help you become more proficient in dealing with conflict as a result of our time together. Whether it was something from the slides, something from more likely from the conversations you had in the breakout rooms, and that you got some encouragement as well as some insight about working through a particular conflict. I encourage you to use these tools and maybe analyze a conflict maybe a few days from now and see if these help you to take it apart and become more effective. Some of the key tips here was think about, get the skill of describing the conflict in a neutral way. Consider the problem being on the table between you rather than held in the person of the other party. This is something that Randy Richards encouraged me. It was an encouragement to me when he was teaching this. Probably don't need a mask on. That more radical than say, can I make some space for the other party? Can I, doesn't mean we don't have things we have to work hard to achieve, an outcome we need to achieve, but can you even think of, can I do a conflict in a way that I am trying to attend to the outcome of the other party, not just tolerate it? Ask hard questions, listen hard, right? Sometimes I talk about this as fierce listening. It should be a bit tiring, actually, if you're listening well, leaning in physically and emotionally and cognitively to really find out what's being said. When things get heated, don't be afraid to use the balcony, right? It's a way to kind of emotionally maybe step away a bit and give a summary, kind of a neutral statement of conflict to yourself from this balcony position. And don't be afraid to invent options. Sometimes it's my way or the highway might be the way you start. But if you say, can we together invent options, you can find that there are more possibilities there than you might have imagined. So with conflict in our own lives, there are our own stories and our own choices and the shared outcomes we create as we effectively deal with conflict with others. Here's the biggest key tip. When it comes to conflict, you do have choices. And I hope that you find that conflict can become all the more positive as you move on from this seminar and build a lot of shared wins. So thank you for spending time with us. Megan, I hope you have some closing words to say.
Well, thank you so much, Dave. It was great and insightful, and thanks to everyone who joined us today. One of the wonderful things about our seminars, we also really want to give back to the local community. So in your inbox, you should be receiving a gift card to Koya's Cafe, a local restaurant here in the Quad Cities, as well as a link to an eval. So we really value your feedback. So please take a moment to complete that as well. And we hope to see you again next month for our next session. Thanks so much, everybody.
Take care.